We've been having these meetings at 2 o'clock on Saturday. Seems like we get the same amount of crowd we have at night. So we're still, it's trial and error still before we decide if we like 2 o'clock on Saturday or 7 o'clock at night. So I know during the winter, so a lot of our members like the 2 o'clock in the afternoon ones. But we want to welcome everyone. My name is David Bullinger. I'm president of the Historical Society. We're looking forward to having our guest speaker here in a few minutes. We want to get the meeting open. We always open with a prayer and a pledge. So if you'd stand, if you're able. And Gary, would you open some prayer?
Yes. Lord, we thank you. We ask your richest blessing on each one that's here today. And Lord, we feel that history is very important. It tells us who we are and where we've been and where we're going. Thank you, Lord, for all your hand on our lives. We just ask your blessing, the richest blessing on all. Be with us here today, Lord. We want to honor you in all that we say and do, and honor you with our lives. We pray this in your name and your will. Amen.
Okay, remain standing. Here's our American flag over here. I don't always tell this at every meeting, but maybe once a year I'll say it. This flag is the flag that was given to the family of Roy Payton. When he passed away, he was the father and founder of our Historical Society. So that's his flag, and we always like to say that in his memory. But if you would, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. You can be seated. A few announcements I want to make. We normally have a hard time finding speakers, but all of a sudden they're coming out of the woodwork. Mr. Stanard here today brought us a couple names. Last week I got a name from Harold Ellinghouse, and I've secured his suggestion. August 15th, Saturday at 2 o'clock here, Mr. Paul Arnold from Dexter will be speaking. He just recently took a job as the history instructor at Zalma High School, but he will be speaking on Captain William T. Leeper. And if you know anything about Captain Leeper, you may want to hear that program. He will give, I guess, his version of what he's heard and researched about Captain Leeper. That should be a good program to hear. And then on November the 5th, we're going to have our Historical Society / Beisman family.
I think it's 7th. It's on
7th? Okay.
7th?
I don't know. The first Saturday in November.
Yes.
Our threshing.
Hay
rides and threshing, not demonstration. That's what I'm trying to say. It's Clark's Creek Farm, just out of Piedmont here. If you've ever seen that done, we'd love to have you. It's a free event, and we have anywhere from 100 to 125, 30, 40 people at times. So that'll be a good event. Bring your kids. I'm certain most kids around here has never saw that, and that should be a good event to attend. You got anything you want to add to that, Gary?
There'll be dinner at noon, and you're welcome to bring stuff and share. And we'll probably thrash about 2 o'clock with wobble wagon rides and hay rides and everything all in between, and the roast hot dogs, that kind of thing. You're all welcome.
We always appreciate Gary and Cheryl hosting that. I don't know who else will do it. Is that the only thresher in Wayne County?
I know of one other.
Well, they're getting few and far between, so. Any board member want to add anything? Any new acquisitions in the museum we want to talk about? I don't offhand know of anything.
Some books.
We are possibly going to get more Native American artifacts in here from the Keith family. They talked to us last week, and as not as a donation, it would be on a loan process, but that's very popular with people who like to tour the museums. and, we're looking forward to that. I wanna give you a quick financial update. Since our last public meeting, we had a pretty big bill to pay. Our annual building insurance was $7,444. Takes a lot to keep up these buildings. She's done talking, I think. So what we need to have some type of good fundraiser to, cause that's a big bill for people to send in $20 a year dues. So, and our lifetime members are not sending in any dues, and that's not required of them to do, but, we're gonna have to get more income in to, keep up with stuff like that for the future. But we're not broke. Right now, our general fund balance is $69.46. Our Fort Benton account's $28.83, and the building fund is $63.77, and we have 2 CDs. And our total assets right now is $21,481. So we have, that sounds like a lot, but if we had a catastrophe with the building or something, and then something happened and came up, it might wipe us out. But right now, that's how we are financially. And anytime you wanna know anything else about stuff like that, the Historical Society, it's, come here, we'll sit you down and show you stuff. Any questions before we move on? Anything any board member wants to say? I know that if I feel like I'm leaving something out, but, Hall of Honor, we will announce that probably, next week, the results of that. That event will probably, the board of the Historical Society has not met, but normally we have it at Eagle Sky. I'm not saying it's gonna be there this year, our board needs to discuss that, but the event is always usually the last Thursday of August. And, if you've never been to that event, it's a wonderful event. I think it's one of the highlights of our year as a Historical Society. And, we honor 10 or 12 people each year. Many, with usually only 1 or 2 still with us. So, and it's a good historic event that we're very proud of, and it honors the people who've gone before us and our current history makers. So, we look forward to that and announcing the winners. Anything else? Don, any acquisitions that we need to announce? Anything new to the museum?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, I'm
Well,
sorry.
we couldn't do it either.
Okay, we've had a lot of donations, and there are some very valuable ones and some very good ones that we're still going through some, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, this time I will introduce your speaker, Mr. John Stanard of Butler County, and he's written a book, and I'll let him go into more details about that. So, Mr. Stanard, if you want to come on up.
Thank you, David.
Glad to have you.
Thank you. It's really, get up here on this microphone. It's on. I think I'm in business. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me say first that it's an honor to be here. I've lived most of my adult life in Butler County, but I have a special affinity to Wayne County for a lot of reasons. I'll get into a few of those in a minute. But I want to congratulate you for this museum and for your organization. Wayne County is arguably, certainly one of the most historic counties in this state, as you all know, and to keep all this history going is really important to a lot of people, and it's important to me. I did 2 pictorial history books, 2 volumes of pictures primarily for Butler County 30 plus years ago, and they were extremely popular. And after spending a whole career at the newspaper, Harold can relate to this. A lot of what I heard were complaints, but after I did those history books, people loved them, and not because I did them, but they really enjoyed the books, and I did too, and we're still enjoying them. So anyhow, history is so important at every level. I promised Tim Addington I wouldn't tell any lies today, but he's gone now, so you're on your own. And I also want to say that I'm really pleased to be here. He probably invited me because I just wrote a book that focuses pretty much on Wayne County, specifically on Wapakella Lake and Cozart Point area of that lake. But I'm honored to be here anyway. And I didn't come up here to sell books. We have a proof book that we got just this week, and I say we because my wife Roseanne in the red back there is a fine artist. She's also a graphic artist. She's designed a number of books. She had a career in advertising and marketing, and she did the book as far as the cover design, the painting. There are about 70 illustrations, black and white illustrations in the book that really make the book. So it's our book. I wrote it, but she was a tremendous assistance on it. We've got it's called a sell sheet, so it tells you to buy the book, but it's got information about the book. She's going to hand out some of those here in a minute, or anytime she wants to. But my connection to Wayne County, it's complicated. I spent almost 30 years on the newspaper in Poplar, Bluff, on the editorial side. My family owned that newspaper from 1916 until we sold it in 1988, 72 years. We can see the handwriting on the wall that you've all now seen with newspapers. It's a sad story, but we pretty much got ahead of watching a property go down. Some people didn't pay attention, and those are really sad stories when they hung on too long and the property wasn't worth anything. But so my career was in newspapering, and my first 10 years after I got out of the Army, I worked on the Minneapolis Star for a year as a copy editor and a page design editor and a makeup editor and several different things like that inside of a year. Came back home to help my dad and my uncles with our local paper, the Daily American Republic in Poplar Bluff, and stayed there for the next 25 years. I had worked there while I was going to the University of Missouri, and so I was familiar with what went on. But it's been a good run. My first 10 years, I was a reporter and photographer, so I was all over about a 5-county region. Back then, we covered Butler County, of course, Clay County, Arkansas, and then the top end of Duncan County, the west side of Stoddard County, all of Wayne County, and then part of Reynolds County, Carter County, Ripley County, I don't know how many, that's 6 or 7. And I was everywhere as a reporter. And probably the last couple of major stories I did for the paper, the present ownership decided to get rid of me and most of the senior staff when that happened in 1990. But the last story I did was in Piedmont. I wrote a feature story about Piedmont at a time when Brown Shoe Company was still running with more than 700 employees, and the industrial base, the industrial employees pretty much equaled the population. It was really an interesting situation. I think it's not quite that way now, but I hope it's better. At any rate, but my connections to this county. My great-great-grandparents are buried out at Wesley Chapel Cemetery out toward Lowndes. Some of you know where Wesley Chapel is, I'm sure. Maybe you don't. But they farmed out on Bear Creek. That's my mother's family. The rest of her family was across the river over in Bullinger County. They had property right where Bear Creek runs into the Castor. I'm a river guy, so I use rivers a lot in my descriptions. But I covered all kinds of news events. We were visiting earlier when Roy McGee Jr. and Dr. Bai went down on Clark Mountain. I was up there that night in a cold, drizzling rain. I have a lot of memories like that, and and lots of good memories as well. But I'm quite familiar with the geography of Wayne County, and I've known a lot of people in Wayne County. Wayne and Kenneth Barrow from Greenville both worked for us at the newspaper. Kenneth was our classified advertising manager. Wayne was one of the best printers anybody ever had. He set type back in the hot metal days, and they were just wonderful folks. Harold's Uncle Frank Ellinghouse, I went with my grandfather about 1950 when he hired him. He drove to Greenville after the Greenville Sun had folded up, and I was with my grandfather a lot. And I remember going to Mr. Ellinghouse's house, and he offered him the job, and he came to work for our newspaper down there as a printer. And he did mainly commercial work. We had a job shop, we called it, did commercial printing for people. And Frank Ellinghouse taught me how to make up a page with lead type, which served me well as a high school kid. I was on the high school paper, and I learned how to do that. And when I went to Minneapolis years later after the university, I was the only younger person around who could go down in the composing room where they were making up the pages with the lead process. I couldn't touch the type because it was all union, and I wasn't in the union, but I could read it upside down and backwards, and I could have made up the page if I had to. And I got a lot of good overtime 2 nights a week doing that, so thanks to Mr. Ellinghouse. So I could go on and on about my connections, but so I did a book, and it's hard to know where to start. I was born in 1940, so I'll let you all do the math on how old I am. When I was 3 years old, my grandfather Wolpers, we called him Daddy John, okay? So he'll be Daddy John. He had a heart condition, and the doctors told him he needed to get out of that newspaper office, which is pretty much a pressure cooker. We published 6 days a week, and Monday through Saturday. He said, you need to get away from that place because you got a lot of stress. It's not going to do your heart any good. So Wapapella Lake was brand new. I think they closed the dam in 41. So before I was even 3 years old, this was early in 1943. My birthday's in July. He leased one of the old farmhouses down on Cozart Point, which is a long peninsula. Some of you know about it, some of you maybe don't. Steve does, I know. And he actually leased the William Iverson Cozart's home place. And it was an unusual house. Of course, there were no people up there. It was like a wilderness. There were literally no people up and down that valley. They were all gone. The Corps had bought them out. And I'll get into that in a moment. But so he leased the house from the Corps. They owned the property. No electricity, no plumbing. Had a real good well on it, and notably, that house sat on a poured concrete foundation, which was very unusual. Out there, where it was 5 miles through the woods, pretty much east of Taskee, and there was nothing out there. I mean, literally, no farms, no people, no houses, no nothing, as we say. And so we started going up there on weekends. The road was so bad, they drove a passenger car in there. How they did that, I don't know, but it was horrible. The steep rocky hills, you could barely get up them. You'd start throwing gravel, and you'd have to back up to the bottom of the hill and get another run at it, that kind of stuff. There was one big flat that was red clay for about a quarter of a mile, and you were lucky to get through there without getting stuck. So that was the setting. And I spent really an inordinate amount of time with my grandparents. We called it the Lake House, and that's the title of the book I wrote. So my grandfather died. I'll back this around. My grandfather died up there at the Lake House one Sunday afternoon while we were all there, very unexpectedly, in May of 1951. So I had from 43 to 51 with him and my grandmother and my great uncle and his wife, Uncle Frank. I was up there certainly not every weekend, but they were active in the Methodist Church in Poplar, Bluff, but at least once or twice a month, we were at the Lake House in that 8-year period. And I didn't know it at the time, but that made had a monumental effect on me and my life after that. Not only getting to be with my grandparents, but what they taught me. When my grandfather came to Poplar Bluff in 1916. He was a school administrator, and my grandmother was a teacher, and they lived at Bonne Terre. And he got interested in newspapering and bought the little weekly at Bonne Terre and decided he really wanted to be a newspaper man. The Republican newspaper in Poplar Bluff was about to go under. Each town had a Democratic paper and a Republican paper. Well, he was active at Republican, and so for $500 from 5 men, Republicans in Poplar Bluff, who loaned him $100 each, he bought that little tiny weekly paper. And Harold will appreciate this, but somebody asked him what he got for his $500, and he said, well, a short subscription list and a shirt full of type, and that reference to lead type. He didn't get much, but he brought that paper from a little tiny weekly in 1916. By 1923, it became a daily. 5 years later, he bought out his Democrat competitor, which was called the Interstate American, and he merged that paper with the Poplar Bluff Republican, made an independent paper, non-political, and it truly was. A lot of people didn't believe that because most of us were Republicans. We endorsed in 72 years. I'm sorry, it was from 1928 until 1988. So however many years, that's 60 years. We endorsed one candidate, and that was Warren Hearns. He was a Democrat when he ran for Senate. So anyhow, that's just a little side story. So I spent those 8 years at the lake house, and I learned so much about how people lived 100 years earlier, because that's the way we lived up there. Had coal oil, didn't say kerosene, they called it coal oil lamps, wood heating stoves, had a big old cook stove that grandmother cooked on, of course. She grew up that way. Both my grandparents were from Bullinger County on Castor River. They didn't know each other until they met at SEMO at the university, where she went to get a teaching degree, and so she was there 2 years and got a teaching certificate. My grandfather left home at age 16. He lived down near Zalma, about 10 miles down the river, and they didn't know each other until they met at school, but he had already left home at age 16 because he had an abusive father who didn't want him to read books and stuff like that. And he joined the Army at age 18 and wound up in the Philippines in the jungles during the Philippine insurrection for 3 years as a squad leader in the U.S. Army Infantry, fighting the guerrilla leader, the Muslim Islamic guerrilla leader, Aguinaldo, and they finally captured him. And then he spent almost a year on the city police force in Manila. So he had 4 years in the Philippines and a lot of interesting and really bad experiences. Saved his money and came home and went over and enrolled at the college because he wanted to get himself an education, and he did. So he switched horses and went from being the high school principal at Bonne Terre to owning this little tiny weekly paper in Poplar Bluff. And when they moved in the summer of 1916, they had 5 children under the age of 6. So that gives you some idea of what was going on. My grandmother helped any way she could with the newspaper. She carried proof. She worked at the counter, and as her kids got older, my Aunt Dorothy was the oldest. When she got to be 10 or 11, she would ride herd on the kids, as she always said. And so that's my newspaper background. And Harold has a similar background. My mother used to say, don't cut your finger, or we don't want to get ink all over everything. People, always tease me that I had ink in my veins instead of blood. Pretty much do. Both my grandfathers were newspaper editors and publishers, and both my parents were journalists. So, anyhow, enough of that. The lake house was just an amazing experience, those 8 years. I learned all about nature. I learned trees. Time I was 8 or 9, I could probably identify most trees in the woods. I wanted to cut a tree down. I thought that they taught me how to, my grandfather, Daddy John, had taught me how to use a hatchet to split kindling for grandmother's cook stove. And so when he was confident I was going to be careful with that, I said, I'd like to cut a tree down, because I'd see the loggers along the highway, a few little sawmills, I'd see them hauling logs in there, and I thought, I could probably cut a tree down with my axe, you know, like a Boy Scout hatchet. And so he picked out a tree for me to cut way down the hillside in front of the house. And so I started working on that tree that weekend. There's, you know, a tree maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter. Unbeknownst to me, it was an ironwood tree. And I have no doubt he picked out the ironwood. It's also called a hop hornbeam tree. That's the real name, but ironwood's what everybody calls them. And it's as hard as persimmon or dogwood. It's and me with that little, you know, like maybe I was 7 or 8 with that little hatchet. It took me about 4 or 5 weekends whacking on it to ever get that tree cut down. And then he told me that it was an ironwood tree, and if I could cut down an ironwood tree with a hatchet, I'd really done something, you know. But they were teachers. Both my grandparents had been teachers, and they taught me all kinds of stuff like that. They taught me which wood you would use for a tool handle. You know, you wanted hickory or ash. If you needed a post maul, if you could find one big enough, you'd probably want a flowering dogwood, or a small maul to rive shingles with. I learned all that kind of stuff, and I learned about life in general and the do's and don'ts, you know, getting along with people, and I've dedicated my book to my parents for allowing me to spend that time with my grandparents in that situation. And now looking back, that was notable, I think. So the book, I was with my late wife, Vida, and I think 3 or 4 of my cousins, and only one of them had ever been up to where the lake house was. And so we went up there one Sunday afternoon. It was in the late 90s, sometime in the 1990s. And of course the house is gone. The Corps of Engineers, as they did with a number of those old places like that, they burned that house down intentionally in the early 70s. So we were up there on a weekend. I could show a couple of my cousins where the lake house was, because they were younger and they never had the opportunity to be up there. And my wife found in the weeds and vines growing over and everything, a stencil about 2 feet long and yay so tall. And the stencil said 2 Johns, T-W-O, and then the J-O-H-N-S. My grandfather was also named John. And he had ordered off to Montgomery Ward and got that stencil, and he painted that on his boat. He had an old wooden boat that he kept up there. And of course, I was named for him, and so we were the 2 Johns. She found that, and even now, I want to get choked up. That was 40 years after the lake house experience, and for that to survive the demolition of that house, and for us to find it, it tore me up. So of course, I took it home, got it cleaned up, and it's framed on the wall in our family room. Vida said at the time, you got to write some of your memories down for your kids and grandkids. And I said, yeah, I do. So I sat down at the computer and I wrote about 2 pages. And I'm really busy in those days, and I was working on those county history books I mentioned. I wrote a couple pages, put it in a file folder, stuck it in my desk, and that was it. Pretty much forget it. Lost Vida 8 years ago. Roseanne and I got together. She had lost David about the same time. And so I'm telling her these stories. She said, you've got to write about the lake house. You've got to write this story. And so I thank her for really building a fire under me. And so probably 5 years ago, we've been married 5 years, even before that, I thought, yes, I do need to do that. So I started doing research in between sitting on several city boards and staying busy. I'm not really retired. I'll never be retired. But I'm a busy guy. I've always got more to do than I'm going to get done. So I finally settled down, and about 3 years ago, I got serious about this book. So I write my memories, like I just told you about chopping the tree down with the hatchet. My grandfather and I also, he taught me how to use a cross-cut saw. And we cut down a dead walnut tree to make a post for a dinner bell. And stuff like that, all the time. He and my great Uncle Frank loved to squirrel hunt, and so I tagged along with them when they'd go squirrel hunting, one or the other. They still hunted, so I was always along, not big enough to carry a gun, but I was exposed to all that kind of stuff. And so I started writing these memories, some of them funny, some of them just interesting. And I'll tell you the four people who were up there. Down the lake house, the old Cozart home. By the way, anytime I've ever seen Cozart on a map or any document, I've never seen it spelled right. It's always C-O-Z-A-R-T, which is wrong. It's C-O-Z-O-R-T. The Corps of Engineers has never figured that out. I myself got the sign on the highway changed finally. It used to be wrong down there at Tuskegee, and I finally got that changed. Anyhow, so where was I? I'm about to lose my chain of thought. Okay, the people who did live out there near the lake, Mary Elizabeth Bettis Whit. Everybody know what that name is? Yeah. Elijah J. Bettis, Dr. Elijah J. Bettis Sr. brought his family into Greenville in either 04 or 06. You see both numbers. 1804, I'm talking about. He's considered, I guess, the first, or certainly one of the first early settlers of Greenville. And then his son was Bettis Jr. Well, this old lady who lived down on Otter Creek, we could look out the front porch of the lake house, and there's Otter Creek. It's the lake now, but that's the Otter Creek arm. Behind the house, 300 or 400 yards, was the river, St. Francis River. And we're about halfway down that point where the house is. So Mary Elizabeth Bettis Whit, W-H-I-T-T, was in her late 80s, middle 80s when we started up there, and her bachelor son, Fred, they lived on the Otter Creek side, down there in Pink Root Holler. That was the name of that big holler. And apparently the Corps allowed them to stay in the old home place, and that was it. They had 80 acres that they sold to the Corps. On the riverside, about a quarter of a mile away, was another couple that my dad figured out apparently early on. They were just squatters. They moved in there, Mr. and Mrs. Long. Her name was Edna, and I don't know his name, never heard it. He was just Mr. Long. And I know that they came out of southern Illinois, and they somehow found Wapapello, and that there were some vacant houses scattered around. And the time we were up there in that 8 or 9 year period, they lived in 2 different places that were up and down the river there. They were wonderful people. They kind of looked out after our place, and Mr. Long was a funny man, so I wrote about him quite a bit in the book. He ordered a new pair of hip boots one time from Montgomery Ward, and Daddy John picked them up came to the store, I guess, in Poplar, Bluff, and we took them up there to him, and I was the only witness to this, but he took me around behind the house, opened these box with these boots in it, and had a big sharp knife, got out of his bibs, and he reached around and made one of these numbers with the knife and pulled his boots out of there. Well, guess what? One boot was cut almost completely through at the knee. And so he looked at that, said, well, I guess I'll just have knee boots. Grabbed up the other boot, cut the top out of it, and he had knee boots. Didn't get mad. He was laughing about it, and carried them around front and showed them to my grandparents, and said, I guess I got a new pair of knee boots, because they could tell what had happened. And my grandfather was disgusted and just walked away. My grandmother said, well, I think knee boots will be okay. And that was the difference in their personalities. So, but those were the people. Come to find out, Mary Elizabeth Bettis Whit was the great-great-granddaughter of Elijah Bettis, who founded Greenville. And so there's all kinds of, when I started doing research, I came across all kinds of stuff like that were really intriguing to me as a history buff. So, I was sitting there one night writing on my computer, and well, let me back up one notch. I didn't have any toys at the lake house, no toys. Now, I'm from age 3 to almost 11, no toys. And I was up there a lot. And I had about a square mile that after I got acquainted with it and took walks with my grandparents and Uncle Frank, I was out there on my own. And I'll tell you my wood duck story here in a minute. And I'm having trouble when I back up, then I can't go forward.
Toys.
Where was I?
Toys.
No toys. I'm sorry. Well, you know when my real birthday was. My toys were lizards, bugs, snakes. I had lots of big black snakes. I learned how to catch a black snake and not get bit. And fool around with him, and then we'd always turn him loose. Didn't have very many mice around. We had skunks that lived under the house, but no toys. So I'm sitting there writing one night about all this stuff, and I realized, I've been writing about the animals that were there, like the groundhogs that had a den in the side yard. There weren't any deer. And then I remembered one day walking down to the lake with my grandpa. He said, wait a minute, come back here. There's a big mud puddle there in the old log road we were going down. He said, those are deer tracks. He was all excited. He said, I haven't seen a deer or a deer track since I was a boy on Castor River in the 1880s and 90s. Remember, this was probably 1945 or 6, maybe somewhere right in there. Our first modern deer season was in 1944. And, it was extremely limited to a couple of days, bucks only, and they only killed, I don't remember the number, it's in the book. And there were no turkeys, certainly. Turkeys were completely gone. In 1940, there were 400 deer in this state, 400 existing in Missouri, best guesstimate. Last year, the hunters legally took 302,000 deer in the state of Missouri. That's where that story has gone. The turkeys were almost gone. There were just very few turkeys. Last spring, the spring season last year, we harvested 53,000 turkeys, okay? There were no beavers. The beavers were gone in this state in 1900. By 1900, there were no beavers in Missouri, none, they were gone. There were no eagles. We saw one bald eagle when we first started going to the lake house, and for a couple of years, and then that bird was gone. I didn't see another eagle till I was an adult. There were no otters. Yeah, and people don't think about that or don't know about that story. But the recovery of animals in this state, largely because of our conservation department that pioneered most all those recoveries. We now have an elk herd over the other side of Van Buren. And I talked to the elk biologist recently when I was working on my book. We got about 350 elk now from a herd of 70 that started over there. And so it's a wonderful story. So I've kept up with all that stuff generally, but I did a bunch of research to bring myself up to date, and I talked to all the biologists. I talked to the deer man, the deer biologist, and found out about this CWD disease that is a huge threat to our deer herd. But Missouri is managing that by far better than any other state in this country. And so the book has turned into really, besides my memoirs, I started writing about these conservation issues. And I know a lot of older people in Wayne County that have issues with the Corps of Engineers. And certainly in earlier times, because they bought out the farms and people had to leave. There's still a little bit of that feeling around. I know that because I have some friends who share those feelings. But it's a complicated story. It's good and bad. But I'm of the personal opinion, and I say so in the book, that both, and I shouldn't say this, but both Clearwater Dam and the Wapapella Dam, I'm not sure they ever needed to be built for flood control, because we know what has happened with the dams. Now I can draw a strong argument, I'm sure, from some of the Corps people and other people who are flooded, but so I started writing about dams. 98% of the rivers in this country have a dam on them. 98%. For one reason or another. Some of them are hydro dams, some of them, and a lot of them are very beneficial, and they do the job that they were built for. Anyhow, I deal with some issues like that. The Lake of the Ozarks was formed by Bagnell Dam, which was a private lake built by Union Electric in the late 20s. And then upstream on the Osage River is Truman Dam that wasn't built until the 70s. And that project now is really a boondoggle. A guy wrote a book about that whole project, and it's called Damming the Osage. And after reading that and doing additional research, that dam probably never should have been built. But I don't want to dwell on dams. But the book is more than just a memoir of my childhood, because in the other part of it, when I'm dealing with the animal recoveries and whatever, am I doing okay with the mic? I have trouble holding it still. The animal recovery stuff, there's a lot of statistics involved, and I didn't want the book to be boring. I did my best to try to plug in stuff as I went along. So I've got a lot of personal anecdotes from my time in the outdoors. Like a few years ago, my son and I were fishing on Current River, and I heard this big thump in the back of the boat. I was up on the trolling motor, and I turned around. I thought Mike, my son, had fallen out of the boat. I said, "What's going on back there?" An otter had jumped off the bank into the boat, and then into the river. We had startled him, and I never did get to see the otter. Of course, Mike thought he was coming in the boat with him, and you don't want to be in a boat with an otter. They're a pretty good sized, pretty vicious animal. We were duck hunting one time down on Black River, and sitting there watching the decoys. There weren't any ducks, and all of a sudden 3 otters popped up right in the middle of the decoy spread, like no farther than in this room here, and played and cavorted around there. So and then there was there was the turkey. The first turkey I ever killed was down near Taskee on Otter Creek, and I shot the turkey, and I was so proud of myself. I was carrying him out of the woods. So guess what? That turkey came to life. Luckily, I had a good grip on both feet, carrying him over my shoulder. He almost got away from me. When he came to life, started flapping those wings, and he jerked my arm up about like that, and I thought he was going to go on, but I managed to subdue him finally. Anyhow, I throw in stuff like that of my personal experiences, and I've lived long enough, there's a lot of them. Now, some of those may be boring to people, I don't know, but, so that's about the book. That's pretty much what it's all about. As I say, the illustrations really make it. We don't have every single story illustrated, but a lot of them. I would be delighted to take questions from people, unless Roseanne tells me I forgot to mention something up here that I'm supposed to talk about.
I think you're good.
But I'd be happy I'd like questions, or discussion or whatever.
Get one back here.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Do you think the cartoons will ever go back into the newspaper?
Say that a little bit louder.
Do you know if the cartoons, comic strips will ever make a comeback in the newspapers?
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry.
there's a lot of things about newspapers that are not ever coming back, but
I know, yeah.
it's a sad story.
I know.
Yeah. So, are you all familiar with the Bethel community? Anybody ever heard of the Bethel community? Even heard of it? Yeah. Well, the Bethel, this is what I was about to forget to talk about. About a half mile back west, if you're leaving Taskee and going in toward the lake house, about a half mile before you get to the lake house is a very old community of Bethel. There's never been a post office, there was never a store there, but there was a school there real early. And there was a school there called the Pink Holler, or Holler, however you want to say that, the Pink Holler School in 1840. and a man named Stevenson was the teacher. And it's documented, and I can't remember now if it's in Cletus Ellinghaus's book about the lost settlements of St. Francis Valley. It might be in Robert Forrester's book. Mr. Forrester lives at Bloomfield. He did a history of Wayne County. But that school was there in 1840, and then later the Bethel Church was built right across the road, and it's really old as well. And I can't remember the numbers. I've got some pretty good numbers in the book, but that church was one of the biggest Baptist churches in its day in this county, which is interesting. The cemetery is really nice. It's a good-sized cemetery, and it's well-maintained. There's a pavilion there. The schoolhouse and the church were there, vacant, sitting there empty, when we're going back and forth to the lake house. Guess what? That school was the first place that Sam A. Baker taught school. First place, yeah. We know him as the governor, and they named the beautiful park after him, but he also was known as the education governor in this state. Beyond that, he also was governor in 1926 when our main highway paving program got underway. So Wayne County, and it's from Patterson area, so Governor Baker was an outstanding governor apparently, and really did a huge amount of benefit for this state. So people don't know that. But that little old school we drove by every time we went in and out to the lake house. My grandfather knew that, and I remember him telling me about that one of our governors taught school right there. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool, or whatever you thought in those days.
Is it Mary Bettis Witt is buried in that cemetery, isn't that right?
Mary Elizabeth Bettis Witt is buried right there in that cemetery, and you have to assume that, and the headstone is not, by the way, she died in 1947, and I can remember going down the hill through the woods and down to their house with my grandfather and my Uncle Frank to see Fred and tell him how sorry they were about his mother dying. And I've got her date of death, and so I know I was 7 years old. And I remember, I may have been coached on this, I don't know. I have a really good long-term memory, and I remember saying something to Fred like, "I'm sorry your mama died," or something like that. And Uncle Frank complimented me later on and said that was a really nice thing for you to say. And it stuck in my head somehow. Yeah, she's buried in that cemetery, and the strange thing about it is, Bettis, which is spelled by all accounts that I've ever seen, Bettis, is spelled on that tombstone. It's like lettuce. It's Bettuce, I think, which is really too bad, but that's the way it is. She's got her full name on there, and I'm sure that in recent years or later years, some family member or somebody who knows put that on there, and they spelled it like you'd spell lettuce, like pretty close. Harold.
My mother was a Mabry, and she's from Center Ridge and Kime area. Is
Yeah.
that close to where you're talking
Yeah,
about?
oh yeah. Center Ridge, and when we were, I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, that neighborhood, the Bethel School predated the Center Ridge School. And so, or did I say that? Yeah, that's right, yeah. So the kids from the Center Ridge area, and even up the river as far as Kime, apparently, would come down and cross the river if it was, I'm sure there was a place where they could walk across. When the river was up, they'd come across by boat to go to school there at Bethel. On Sunday mornings, when we were at the lake house, we could hear the church bell ring at Center Ridge. And I remember going over there in our boat and climbing up the hill with my grandpa and seeing the church and school was still there then. I don't know if it was still active or not, but the church was, because we could hear that church bell ring. It has always sounded so good to hear the church bell. I remember they talked about that.
It was across the river from.
It was directly across the river from where we tied up our boat. Yeah, on the river side of the peninsula. It's probably from that boat landing. I'd say from the boat landing, less than a mile.
It's on the map in the book.
Yeah, Roseanne did a really nice map of that whole area that shows everything from the mouth of Otter Creek, which is about a mile down the road from the lake house, back up to the Bethel Church and School area. Everything's labeled. Yeah, there were quite a community on that side of the river over there. Again, I guess, I don't know if Kime was ever incorporated, probably not, but very well-known settlement. And then, of course, the next thing down the river was Shaonia. And somebody asked me if I was gonna talk about Shaonia. That's an interesting story. When Mr. Houck, the Houck Stadium at the University of Cape Girardeau is named for him. He was a well-known person in a lot of ways. He built a railroad from Cape that came all the way across the swamp that would be east of Advance, Missouri now. Advance had a different name. Lakeville, I think. Can't remember for sure. It's in the, I think it's maybe in the book. Railroad to Puxico and then headed over toward what's now Wapapello. And then it branched and went on south toward Poplar Bluff. But the west branch went what's now Wapapella, and Houck named, he gave that little community that name. And that railroad went all the way up to St. Francis River Valley, right close to the river, to the mouth of Otter Creek. And then it made a left turn and went up all the way up Otter Creek to Williamsville. And you know, you cross it on whatever that A highway, I think it is. You cross Otter Creek, and it veered off and made its way into Williamsville. And the St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern Railroad, of course, from St. Louis was coming through Williamsville already, so it hooked in there. But it went on across the river at Williamsville, that Houck Railroad, and went all the way to Hunter, Missouri, and tied in to the big sawmill at Grandin. It's interesting how back even 125 years ago, all that stuff happened. And but Shaonia, which is it's a corruption of Osage, I think. It was how came up with a lot of phony Indian names. Ojibwe was one of them. Now there's an Ojibwe tribe, but he spelled it different. He put a Y on the end of it, made it W-A-Y, things like that. But he had some affinity for doing that. And so Shaonia is a corruption of Osage somehow. And so he named Shaonia. I can't think of the man's name. It's in the book. Knew where the railroad was coming through there, so he bought from Overton Bettis, I think, who owned that land at the time. That would have been Mary Elizabeth Bettis's grandfather. He bought 50, 60 acres from him and donated it to Houck, and his name was Wells, so he was going to name that. He knew that he was going to start a little town there, and it was going to be Wellsville. And I think this, I know this was out of Cletus's book, and I gave him due credit for the stuff, the facts and figures that I stole like that. I didn't see that Lost Settlements book over here. Is that out of print, or do you have some?
I'm gonna talk about them books in a minute.
Okay. Well, I don't want to run too long up here. I've been yapping for 50 minutes or almost, so I don't want to overstay my welcome, but I feel really welcome, by the way, saying that word. A lot of nice people in this room, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you are doing with your historical group. Having been involved in a lot of volunteer efforts, I know how it is to tackle a project like this and make it work and be able to raise enough money to keep it going. That's really tough and harder all the time, I know. Is there another question I could take?
Might make a comment that my brother Clay Sellinghouse wrote a book, Mingo, and he needed a cover picture, and he found a picture of John Stanard in a boat, and it was taken by rural Missouri photographer, what's his name?
Jim McCarty.
Jim McCarty.
Yeah,
And he contacted Jim and asked him if he could use it on his book cover, and he granted permission.
he sure
So
did.
John's picture is on the front page
Yeah,
of
It's,
Mingo
it's
book.
it's over here on the table, that guy in the canoe is me. Jim McCarty, I hired right out of the journalism school at Mizzou, his first job. He worked for me 2 or 3 years. I used to try to hire the best I could find, knowing they weren't gonna stay in Poplar Bluff, but I'd have them for a couple of years, and it worked out really well. Jim was one of my star pupils out of my newsroom, and he just retired, by the way. He's the editor emeritus now of Rural Missouri. And you probably get that magazine if your electricity comes from a co-op, I'm sure you do. It's the statewide co-op magazine. I think has the largest subscription in the whole state. So, yeah, he came to Mingo one time. He wanted to do a feature story on Mingo Refuge, and called me knowing that I've spent an awful lot of time at Mingo, and, so I took him over there, and he won't make my picture, so he did. Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and, if you buy a book, we have no books for sale today. The only book we have is a proof book, but probably within about 3 weeks, you can get them online, if you so wish.
Thank you.
I don't know if any of you would be interested, but I have enlargements of some of the illustrations of the book.
I thought that was me doing that.
Anyway, I don't know if you're interested, but I have some of these. I don't know.
What's that?